Claire Bennett is not the type of woman who appears in the papers or at flashy parties, although she could be. The only daughter of real estate tycoon Harold Bennett, who built a string of New York skyscrapers, Claire grew up in a world where everything was for sale, except honesty. She is 28 years old, possessing an elegant, classic beauty with light brown hair always tied neatly, blue-gray eyes with a strange calmness and a gentle smile, just enough to attract others' attention without overwhelming. Claire does not live ostentatiously, nor does she brag about her background. For her, the most important thing is not money, but personality, something she always looks for in the people who enter her life, but rarely finds. Despite her privileged life, Claire lives a modest lifestyle. She studied economics at Harvard and then joined her father's investment analysis department, not because it was easy or because she was favored, but because she was genuinely good. Her colleagues admire her not only for her family's prestige, but also for her hard work, drive, and genuine humility. However, there is one thing Claire has not been able to do for many years: believe in love. When you live in a world where people approach you because they know who you are, or more accurately, whose daughter you are, the distinction between sincerity and exploitation becomes frighteningly murky. Claire has had a few relationships. One fell in love with her because he wanted to get close to her father for a project. Another used her as a springboard into the world of tycoons. And the most recent, a man who promised to take her out of the golden cage, secretly recorded their every conversation and sold it to the tabloids. Since then, Claire has built a wall around her heart. She still smiles, is still polite, still goes to work like any other woman. But she lives on guard. When it comes to love, she no longer has any expectations. Only doubts remain, until Daniel showed up. Daniel Monroe, 32 years old, head of marketing at a rising technology company, is the type of man who easily makes women flutter. Tall, bright appearance, charming smile, and a way of talking that is both sophisticated and humorous. Daniel is the type of person who lights up the whole room every time he walks in. But what makes Claire pay attention to him is not his appearance, but the way he patiently pursues her for 6 months without showing off, without rushing. He didn't seem fazed by her family's fame. In fact, on their first few dates, Daniel didn't even know who Claire was until he saw her name in an economics article. "If you were a princess, I'd be the one to run you out of the castle," he'd joked. Claire laughed, feeling for the first time in years that someone had spoken to her as if she were just Claire. After a year of dating, Daniel officially proposed. That evening, at a small restaurant in Central Park, under the soft yellow light, he took out a simple ring, not a large diamond, not extravagant, but a gold-plated ring with their names engraved inside. "I don't need fame. I don't need a villa or a luxury car. I just need you. If you need me too." Claire was stunned. Her heart fluttered. She was touched, truly touched, not by the romantic words or the special ring, but by the way he looked at her, sincere, warm, without calculation, and she nodded. But that night, back at her apartment, Claire sat by the window for hours, looking out at the traffic below, her mind full of conflict. She had agreed, but why was her heart still so uncertain? One question still lingered somewhere in the back of her mind. Does Daniel love me, or the life I can give him? Claire knew that if she didn't find the answer, she wouldn't be able to enter this marriage with peace of mind. And that very night, a daring plan began to form in her mind. A plan to test the heart of the man she was about to call her husband. Claire has always been a private person, but she has never had to live a double life like this. After Daniel's sweet proposal, instead of being immersed in happiness like other brides-to-be, she embarked on a test plan that even she herself was not sure where it would lead. She knew that if she didn't do this, she would forever live in doubt. And if Daniel's love was true, then even if she had nothing left, he would still stay. So Claire concocted a story. A sudden financial crisis in her family's conglomerate had frozen assets, stalled projects, and her father was in trouble for tax evasion and market manipulation. She sent Daniel a brief email saying she was confused and needed time to sort things out. Claire then moved out of her 2,000 square foot penthouse with panoramic views of Manhattan and into a rundown apartment in a poor neighborhood in Brooklyn. The apartment was one-tenth the size of the one she'd lived in, with moldy ceilings, intermittent hot water, and noisy neighbors at all hours of the night. She also left her father's company and took a job as a waitress at a small corner restaurant. Every day, Claire had to wear an old uniform, stand for hours carrying food, cleaning tables and chairs, and receive unreasonable complaints from customers. Her hands began to develop calluses, her back ached, and every night she just wanted to lie down on the bed without eating dinner. Her once designer wardrobe had been replaced with a few outfits she'd picked up at flea markets. Her long hair, once styled at high-end salons, was now held back with an old rubber band. Still, Claire's eyes sparkled, because she believed that if Daniel was sincere, it would all be worth it. When the two met again after the financial incident, Daniel was shocked, but held her tight. "The money may be gone," he whispered, "but we still have each other, right?" Claire choked, nodding. Her heart felt light. She wanted to believe she was wrong, that not everyone was like the men of the past. Daniel could be different. But then time passed. During the first week, Daniel visited her frequently. He bought food, cooked dinner in the tiny kitchen, and sometimes made jokes to make her laugh. He said he would postpone the wedding until things were better. The second week, his visits became less frequent. "I'm busy with a meeting. I have an urgent business trip. I'm so tired today." Short messages replaced the warm evenings. Claire began to feel the distance with each call. He didn't ask her how she was doing as often, nor did he smile when she opened the door. His hugs became looser. She remembered one rainy evening, after a long, tiring shift, she called Daniel and asked to meet. He sighed into the phone. "You know, things are complicated now. We should give each other some time to think." That silenced Claire. She hung up and sat quietly on the plastic chair by the window, watching the rain fall on the dusty pane. A chill crept up inside her, not from the weather, but from the suspicions that were slowly turning into reality. She began to notice the little things. Daniel stopped asking about her new job. He started to avoid her when she mentioned the future. Old promises, like, "We'll get through this together," now sounded like empty platitudes. Claire didn't blame him right away. She tried to reassure herself that everyone needed time to adjust to big changes. But deep down, she knew Daniel was changing, and she, as the poor girl, was no longer the person he was attracted to. One night, Claire stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself with tired eyes. "This is the real me. No makeup, no fame, no fortune," she whispered. "Do you still want to stay?" Claire is not a pessimist, but in recent weeks, Daniel's every action, every word, has made her feel like she's standing in front of a door that's slowly closing. And he's on the other side. She couldn't pinpoint the moment when things started to slip. Maybe it was when Daniel canceled the dinner they'd been planning all week, or when he showed up late, rushed, and left early with the excuse of an urgent meeting. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not as warm as before, but confused, a little bit of hidden irritation. Daniel kept up his outward appearance of attentiveness, but Claire could feel the distance growing, like the gap between two people sitting across from each other, drinking coffee, but no longer sharing a story. He started saying things like, "We're so different, you know? I'm not sure I can handle this kind of pressure forever. This life isn't what I imagined." Claire usually listened silently. She didn't want to interrupt his feelings, but each sentence was like a small cut into her self-esteem, the one who was living in a poor status that she herself created to test his feelings. One late afternoon after work, Claire was walking along a street damp from a light rain when she was struck by a sight that stunned her. Daniel was standing outside a fancy downtown restaurant. He was dressed smartly, holding a large bouquet of flowers, a smile on his face that was surprisingly gentle. She didn't move closer until a young woman emerged from the restaurant. She was beautiful, with wavy blonde hair, a Chanel dress, and expensive high heels that sparkled in the light. Daniel walked up to her, gently handed her the bouquet, and they hugged, getting into the waiting BMW. Claire stood silently under the porch, her eyes fixed on that image. A choking feeling welled up inside her, both pain and confirmation of the premonitions that had been lingering in her heart for a long time. The next day, Claire began to secretly follow. not out of blind jealousy, but because she needed to know the truth. Several times after work, she saw Daniel coming out of a shopping mall with that girl. They were laughing and talking, holding hands, as if they were living in a perfect world. No worries, no one waiting behind them. Claire didn't cry. She just felt cold, a cold that seeped into her bones from the deep cracks in her heart. She didn't rush to question Daniel. She wanted to give him a chance, to tell the truth, to make a choice, and most of all, to let her know if she was right or wrong. One weekend evening, Claire called Daniel. "Are you free? I want to meet and talk a bit. About us." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he replied a little hesitantly, "Uh, okay, I'll come." Claire chose to meet him at the small park near her old apartment, where they used to spend peaceful afternoons eating ice cream and talking endlessly. She sat on her usual bench, wearing a thick coat, holding a cup of hot tea. The cold wind swirled around her hair, but her eyes were calm, like someone who had prepared for the worst. Daniel arrived not long after, still in a formal suit, but his eyes were somewhat shy. He didn't look at her right away. Claire smiled slightly. "Thanks for coming. I think it's time we talk things out." He nodded but said nothing. Claire looked at him, then asked softly, "Do you still love me, Daniel?" Daniel froze for a moment. He looked down at his clenched hands, then up at her. "Claire, you have changed." Her heart skipped a beat. "It's not just about money. It's everything. The way you live, the way you think, everything. You're no longer the girl I used to love." She tried to keep calm. "You mean I'm poor so you don't find me attractive anymore?" Daniel lost his cool for a moment. "Don't say that. I know you're not a shallow person. But think about it. We're so different. You come from a different world. Now that you're living like this, I'm tired too. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." Claire looked at him for a long time. Every word he spoke was like a knife cutting into her last shred of faith. She had given him a chance, and he had chosen to blame it on pressure instead of looking at himself. He continued, "Maybe we are trying to hold on to something that is no longer suitable." Claire clenched her fists, but her voice remained soft. "So, if I had never been poor, if all I had to lose was a challenge, would you still stay?" Daniel was silent. No answer. The answer is silence. Claire stood up and walked slowly to the window of her small apartment, where the dim light from the street lamps cast long, gloomy shadows on the floor. Outside, the streets were still. Bustling, people were still rushing back and forth. But to Claire, the world seemed to slow down, dense and heavy. She just saw Daniel off. No, more precisely, he just left after leaving a deep slash in her heart. All evening, she tried to stay calm, listen patiently, even convince herself that maybe he was scared, confused, and needed time to understand himself. But at the last minute, when Claire was forced to ask what she had kept hidden in her heart all this time, all illusions collapsed. Her voice was light at that moment, but each word seemed to contain so much hope. "If I have nothing left, no money, no house, no status, do you still want to marry me?" The question echoed in the heavy silence. Claire looked straight into Daniel's eyes. There was confusion, a little regret, but no love like before. He did not answer immediately. He hesitated. His eyes avoided hers. His hands clenched and unclenched, as if he were struggling between reason and emotion. Finally, he sighed, a very long sigh. "I'm sorry, but I can't live with someone who has nothing." Claire was stunned. Everything she had feared, suspected, and tried to deny was now confirmed by the words of the person she loved. She stood there silent. No tears, no anger, just a vast void opening up inside her. Daniel left shortly after that. No more hugs, no real goodbyes. The door closed behind him, leaving Claire alone in the small, suffocatingly cold room. She returned to the sofa and sank down, hugging her head to her knees. She didn't cry, at least not for the first few minutes. The pain was so great that her body was paralyzed. She didn't know how long she sat there, or when it started to rain. Then the tears began to fall. No sound, no sobbing, just silent tears streaming down her cheeks, wetting her trembling lips. Claire didn't just cry because of a broken love. She cried because she felt betrayed, because she had believed, hoped, bet everything, only to receive a cruel rejection. She once thought that if she tested Daniel and he passed, they would have a true love, stronger than anything. But reality was crueler than she imagined. Daniel fails the test because he never loved Claire for who she was. He loved her aura, the stability and the rich life she brought. When those things disappeared, so did his feelings for her. She hugged her pillow, leaned her head against the wall, and closed her eyes. The room was too quiet, so quiet she could hear her heart pounding through the chaos. This wasn't the ending she wanted, but at least it was the answer she needed. She no longer had to wonder, no longer had to dream, or try to hold on to a superficial love built on a shaky foundation. Claire raised her head, wiping away her tears. Her face was blurred, her eyes were red, but there was a glimmer of strength in her gaze. She lost Daniel, but she didn't lose herself. She still has her self-respect, her intelligence, and most of all, a heart that knows how to truly love. Claire didn't come to work for the next 3 days. She took a leave of absence, avoided her phone, turned off all communication, and cut off all contact with Daniel. She needed time, not to forget, but to sort things out, especially herself. During those 3 days, she lived quietly. She cleaned up her small apartment. She wrote down random notes in her diary. She made herself warm cups of tea every afternoon and allowed herself to be sad and hurt for the last time. She thought a lot about Daniel, about the times he held her hand in silence, about the gentle eyes he used to give her, the hugs, the kisses, the evenings they sat together and talked about the future. But all those memories now, like a beautiful film, were just lies. Claire once hoped that love was strong enough to overcome all barriers, but she was wrong. In Daniel's heart, money and status were still what determined whether a person was worthy of being with him for life. And Claire, in the role of an ordinary girl, with no money, no home, no status, was no longer worthy. On Wednesday evening, she returned to the family's main villa. Her elderly father, Mr. Richard Winston, chairman of Winston Real Estate, was sitting in his study, flipping through documents for the company's 30th anniversary celebration. He looked up when he saw Claire enter. Although his hair was streaked with gray and his eyes were somewhat tired, he still maintained the dignity of a capable leader. He looked at his daughter for a long time, then gently asked, "Have you found the answer yet?" Claire nodded. Her eyes were calm but not as sad as before. "I tried, and I know." Mr. Richard did not ask any further questions. He just patted the chair next to him, signaling his daughter to sit down. And when Claire sat down, he only said one sentence. "Then it's time for you to come back." A week later, Winston Real Estate celebrated its 30th anniversary at one of the city's most luxurious hotels. The media covered it extensively. In newspapers and social networks, images of Claire, the only daughter of real estate tycoon Richard Winston, suddenly reappeared, radiant and full of power. She wore an emerald evening gown, her hair elegantly pulled back into a bun, and light but subtle makeup. Every step she took on the red carpet was a declaration. "I am back with all my true self." The media was abuzz. Newspapers ran headlines such as, "Mysterious heiress of the Winston Empire makes first appearance after 2 years of absence. Claire Winston, the spectacular return of the secretive young lady." And among the thousands of people watching the event via live stream, there was one person who was stunned when seeing that image. Daniel. He couldn't believe his eyes. Claire, the woman he had left less than 2 weeks ago, was standing on that magnificent stage, holding a microphone, smiling gently but confidently, speaking in front of hundreds of distinguished guests. She spoke about the company's journey, about her father's dreams, about her upcoming role in inheriting Winston Real Estate. Each sentence was sure, calm, and full of leadership. Daniel felt like someone had punched him in the chest. He sank into his chair, eyes glued to the screen. Sweat beaded on his palms. Regret came so fast it took his breath away. She was never nothing. She is the heiress to a large corporation, the girl he once loved and lost because of a facade he did not have the patience to understand. Daniel rushed to the event venue like a madman. He didn't care about the heavy security, nor the curious looks of the people around him. He only knew that he had to see her, had to explain, had to do something before it was too late. When he arrived, the event was almost over. Claire was chatting with her partners when she heard a voice calling from behind her. "Claire!" She turned back. Daniel was panting, his shirt rumpled, his face full of worry. All eyes were on them. Claire walked over, keeping her composure. She looked at him as if he were a stranger, with nothing left to hold on to. Daniel approached, his voice choked. "Claire, listen to me. I don't know. I don't know who you are. I was taken by surprise, but that doesn't mean I don't love you." Claire looked at him for a long moment. There was a pause, then she smiled, a sad but proud smile. "You didn't leave me because I had nothing, but because you never truly loved me." The next morning there was no more cold, drizzling rain. The thin sunlight shone through the window, illuminating every speck of dust floating in the small apartment where Claire had lived for the past month, the place she had chosen to test her own love. Claire wore a simple white dress, no makeup, no accessories. Her elegant yet calm beauty now carried something very different, a calmness after the storm. She held the engagement ring that Daniel had given her, quietly going to see him one last time. Daniel was sitting in the familiar coffee shop, where they used to laugh and date in the early days. When he saw Claire walk in, he stood up, as if by reflex. "Claire?" She nodded and sat down on the chair opposite him. Their eyes met in silence. Daniel looked even more haggard, confusion evident on his face. "I want to see you," he said softly. "I need to explain." Claire placed the ring on the table. The dry sound of metal hitting wood rang out. "I don't need any more explanations," she interrupted, gently but firmly. Daniel was stunned. "Everything you need, you already have. The answer. I didn't choose you when you had nothing. So what more is there to say?" Daniel bowed his head, his hands clenched. He stammered, "I was wrong, Claire. I I was taken by surprise. I didn't know what to do. I just thought about reality. The truth is, you didn't love me. At least not the real me," Claire replied, her eyes shining fiercely. "You loved an image, an easy life. And when I no longer represented that, you withdrew." She stood up, not waiting for a response. She had waited long enough. In that moment, Daniel tried to take her hand, but then let it go, as if he knew he had no right to do so. Claire turned and walked out of the shop. Daniel slumped down in his chair, his eyes filled with shock, regret, and remorse. He never expected that in just a few short weeks, he would lose the only girl who had ever made him think about marriage. Claire left to Daniel's surprise and regret. She learned a valuable lesson. True love needs no tests because it will never make us doubt. Despite the pain, Claire knew she had avoided a wrong marriage. Thank you for following the story. If you love emotional and surprising stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. See you in the next video. Love.